Hello, my friends. If you're ready for more terrifying stories, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe.
I had been living alone for about a month in my small house at the edge of town. A quiet street, only a few neighbors, the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. That night, though, everything changed. It started as a sound, faint and indistinct, like footsteps across gravel. I thought it was my imagination. My dog, Buster, had passed away last year, so it couldn't be him. I listened closer and realized the sound wasn't coming from inside the house. It was outside on the driveway. I approached the window cautiously. Nothing. Empty driveway, quiet street, the soft glow of the streetlight bouncing off the asphalt. I turned away, shaking my head. Maybe it was a neighbor coming home late. I told myself to relax. Then I saw it. A figure, standing perfectly still at the edge of the yard. Tall, thin, and entirely dark, except for the faint light glinting off what looked like smooth, pale skin. My heart stuttered. I opened the window to call out, but my voice stuck in my throat. The figure didn't move. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe, at least not visibly. It just stared. I locked every door and window, turned on every light I could find, and tried to distract myself with a movie. But every shadow in the living room seemed to stretch toward the figure outside. Every creak of the floor sounded like it was coming closer. By the time I forced myself to sleep, I wasn't sure I'd close my eyes at all. The next night, it was closer, right at the edge of the porch. I checked everything. Locks were secure, doors bolted, yet I felt it was inside the house, too, somehow. I kept seeing faint scratches on the windows, tiny lines I hadn't noticed before. I tried to call someone, anyone, but my phone lost service the moment I stepped onto the porch to check. By the third night, it didn't just stand there. It moved slowly, deliberately from the porch to the edge of the street, never turning, never blinking, always pointing toward me. I stayed in my room, lights on, the door locked, a knife in my hand, sweating despite the cool night air. I tried to leave the house once. The moment I stepped outside, I realized the car wouldn't start. I could feel something pressing against me, a presence too heavy to push past. The street seemed to stretch impossibly long, curving back on itself, always returning me to the house. It didn't matter which way I went. It didn't matter how fast I ran. Then it began leaving signs. First, scratches on the doors. Thin, shallow, deliberate. Then marks on the walls inside the house, as if it had been here without entering, marking its territory, its presence. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. I barely ate. I barely slept. My life became a long, tense vigil, waiting for the thing outside to do something. I didn't know what. And then one night, I heard it differently. A sound that didn't come from the street. It came from my own yard, from behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just the house, the porch, the street. Then I saw movement at the corner of my eye. A shadow detached itself from the darkness. Not a person, not exactly. Featureless. Pale. Smooth where there should have been a face. I froze. I couldn't breathe. Then it raised its arms slowly, holding something. A small, leather-bound notebook, worn and weathered, appeared in its hand. I wanted to run. I wanted to throw it away. But some instinct, curiosity, fear, or compulsion I didn't understand made me reach for it. The instant my fingers touched the leather, the world shifted. Memories flooded me. Not mine. Houses I had never seen. Streets I had never walked. People I had never met. Fear, panic, helplessness. I felt it all as if it belonged to me. I realized the notebook was a record of the watched, the observed, and now I was in it. I dropped it. The figure outside didn't move. It simply stood there, patient, observing. And then, impossibly, it dissolved into the night, melting into the shadows as though it had never been a separate thing at all. But I had changed. I could feel it in me. The patience, the watching, the cold awareness that never let up. Days passed. I tried to leave. Roads looped back. Cars wouldn't start. Phones died. The figure had taught me what it wanted me to learn. Escape was impossible. Understanding was compulsory. I began seeing it everywhere. Shadows at windows, in corners, glimpses in passing cars. Others like it. Blank faces. Patient. Observing. And I knew then the truth. It wasn't outside to scare me. It was outside to prepare me. And I had been prepared. One night, I stepped outside deliberately. Not to flee, not to fight, but to wait. And I understood something else. When someone notices, really notices, it waits for them. When someone invites it, even unknowingly, it begins the cycle anew. I'm no longer afraid. I have become a watcher. I stand at the edge of my yard, featureless, patient, waiting. And one day, someone new will notice me. They will feel the weight of observation, the inevitability of attention. And then they will understand. The horror isn't outside. The horror is in noticing. And now I wait. I've been dreaming of this trip for months. A weekend in the remote Appalachian backcountry, away from roads, towns, and anyone who might disturb the silence. My friend Eric and I had planned every detail, or so I thought. We parked at a small gravel pull-off and hiked in along a narrow trail that disappeared almost immediately into the dense forest. The sun was low, casting long shadows that danced like living things across the ground. We found a clearing near a creek, the perfect spot to set up our tent. The water babbled quietly, moss coated every rock, and the forest seemed to inhale and exhale around us. I should have noticed the quiet was too complete. No birds, no insects, not even the occasional rustle of squirrels. Just stillness, thick and suffocating. The first night was uneventful, or so I thought. We built a fire, ate some canned chili, and joked about going off the grid in the middle of nowhere. The stars were bright, the kind you only see far from city lights. I fell asleep with the comforting murmur of the creek in my ears, but I woke hours later to the faintest whisper, like someone breathing my name from just beyond the firelight. "Eric," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. He mumbled something incoherent and turned over. I stared into the darkness. Nothing. No animal. No person. Nothing but the trees and the way the shadows seemed thicker than they should be. I told myself it was the wind, the old camping nerves, anything but what it felt like, being watched. Morning brought no relief. The trail we had used to reach the clearing seemed subtly changed. Rocks and fallen logs shifted. The creek had curved differently. My compass spun randomly. Our GPS had no signal. I realized with a chill that the forest was no longer the same forest we had entered. We decided to hike toward what we hoped was the main trail. Every step led us deeper into a part of the mountains I didn't recognize. Landmarks that had seemed familiar vanished, only to reappear twisted or in slightly different locations. Then we saw it, footprints, long, thin, human-like, but elongated, with toes bent unnaturally. They led in a circle, then disappeared into the undergrowth. By nightfall, we were lost, exhausted, and increasingly panicked. The whispers returned, louder now, circling us, forming syllables that almost sounded like words. Stay, follow, see. I wanted to flee, but my legs refused. We stumbled into a small clearing dominated by a massive, ancient oak. Around its base was a circle of black stones, slick and smooth, arranged like a primitive altar. The air was dense, smelling of iron and damp earth. The whispers seemed to emanate from the stones themselves, rising and falling, coaxing, tempting. "Don't touch it," I told Eric. He stepped forward anyway. The moment his fingers brushed a stone, the ground trembled. Shadows stretched along the forest floor, black and liquid, curling around us. The whispers joined into a chorus, repeating in unison, "Come, see, become." I tried to pull him back, but he froze, his eyes wide, blank, fixed on something I couldn't see. Shapes pressed against the trees, thin, distorted, bending limbs in impossible ways, eyes glowing faintly. The forest itself seemed alive, breathing, shifting to herding us into the center of the circle. Then, the strangest thing happened. Eric's form shimmered, like light through water, and then he was gone. Just gone. I fell to my knees, screaming, searching, but only silence answered, thick and heavy, pressing against my ears. I ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, tripping over roots, the whispers still calling. Somehow, I ended up back at the creek near our original campsite. It looked normal, peaceful, untouched, but Eric was gone. The stones had vanished, and the forest no longer seemed to shift, at least not visibly. I sat there until dawn, too afraid to move, replaying the night in my head. When I finally stumbled back to the main road, I called the local authorities. They found no trace of Eric, no footprints, no stones, no evidence that we had ever been in that hidden clearing. Even my gear showed no signs of struggle. Weeks later, I began noticing small things. Shadows moved slightly off from where they should. Reflections in windows sometimes showed a second figure behind me, one I knew wasn't there. And then the stone appeared, black, smooth, cold, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. I never remembered picking it up, but there it was in my pocket, tethering me to the forest. I realized then the truth. The forest didn't want Eric. It wanted me. I had survived the night because it had tested me, probed my mind, assessed my fear. And now, with the stone in my hand, I belonged to it, whether I admitted it or not. The pull is growing stronger every day. When I sleep, I dream of the clearing, the whispers, and Eric's blank eyes, staring from the shadows. And one night, I know I will follow them willingly, not as a victim, but as the next caretaker of that place. Another shadow in the Appalachian wilderness, patient, eternal, and waiting. The mountains are beautiful, majestic, inviting, but they are patient, and the patient always get what they want. I thought I was prepared. I thought I understood what the woods could do. But no one, no matter how many hikes they've taken or how many nights they've spent under the stars, can prepare for the way the forest wants you. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. Me, my friend Lena, and her brother Eric. We were driving into the backcountry, far from anything resembling civilization, to a place Eric claimed he had found on an old hiking map. Untouched, he said. No trails, no campsites. Nobody goes there. It's perfect. The drive up was long and winding, a narrow mountain road flanked by thick pines that seemed to bend toward us as we passed. By the time we parked, the sun was low, spilling golden light through the trees. The forest smelled sharp and alive, damp earth mixed with pine resin. We hiked for a few miles until we reached a clearing. At its center was a small pond, still and reflective, surrounded by the trees we had just emerged from. We set up camp quickly, gathering firewood and pitching our tents. Everything seemed ordinary, too ordinary. I noticed the silence first. No birds, no rustling squirrels, not even the wind. The forest seemed to hold its breath. That night, I barely slept. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to a faint sound, water lapping. At first, I thought it was the pond, but the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate, like someone walking in shallow water. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside. The pond glimmered under the moonlight, and then I saw them, footprints. They were enormous, far larger than any humans, stretching from the forest to the edge of the water and disappearing beneath its surface. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, convinced it was a trick of the shadows. I woke Lena and Eric. They groaned and complained, but when I showed them the footprints, their faces went pale. "Probably a bear," Eric muttered. I knew better. Bears didn't make prints that long or narrow, and they certainly didn't disappear into water. We decided to wait until morning before doing anything. But when dawn came, the trail we had hiked to get there was gone. Not overgrown, gone. Trees blocked the way, roots twisted in impossible patterns. Every direction looked identical. Panic set in. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes, I couldn't tell. Tom had started to feel strange. The pond kept appearing at the edge of my vision, even as we tried to move away. Then I noticed the shadows. They were moving differently now, longer, thinner, bending at angles they shouldn't. Tall figures emerged from between the trees, still and silent, observing us. Their heads tilted unnaturally, like birds watching for perch. I told Lena and Eric to keep moving, but the forest resisted. Paths looped back on themselves. Trees seemed to close in around us, guiding us back toward the pond. And the whispering began. Faint at first, unintelligible, then clearer. Come closer. Eric stepped forward, drawn by the pond. I grabbed his arm, shaking him. "Don't!" I shouted. Lena was frozen, staring at the water. And that's when I saw it. The reflection. It wasn't ours. Not quite. Our bodies were there, but our faces were wrong. Elongated, hollow-eyed, twisted into expressions that didn't belong to us. Behind us in the reflection, the forest shifted, bending impossibly. I tried to drag them away, but it was no use. The figures from the shadows glided closer, not touching the ground. They didn't speak, but I could feel their attention pressing on my mind, probing, testing. The pond rippled, and the water itself seemed to rise like liquid smoke, forming shapes taller than any human, faceless and perfect. And then it happened. Lena, Eric, both of them were pulled forward, as if the air itself had gripped them. I grabbed at them, but my hands went through something heavier than water, something alive. They screamed, but it wasn't their voices. The pond consumed them, and then the forest shifted again, leaving me alone. I ran. I don't know how long. Hours? Days? The sun moved strangely. Shadows lengthened and shortened erratically. The forest was endless, looping back on itself. I tripped, fell, stumbled, but I didn't stop. Eventually, I emerged on a real trail, one I recognized from earlier. My car was there, just as we had left it. The GPS worked. The road was empty. I drove home in silence, too exhausted to speak, haunted by images that refused to leave my mind. Authorities found nothing. No trace of Lena or Eric. No footprints, No trail, no campsite, nothing. Weeks later, I returned, not to the clearing, but to the general area. The forest looked ordinary. The pond was gone. The trees were normal. Everything was just forest. I couldn't find any evidence of what had happened. I told myself I had imagined it all, but I know I didn't. Sometimes at night, I dream of that pond. I see Lena and Eric standing silently beneath its surface, faces voided, watching me. And then I realize something worse. The pond doesn't just exist in the woods. It exists in waiting, patient, and it can appear anywhere a forest is quiet enough, where the trees lean just so, where the wind doesn't stir. I survive, but I live with the knowledge that it is patient. And one day, I will see the pond again. I know it. And next time, I may not get away. I didn't mean to go that far. I never meant for anything to go wrong. But the Appalachian Mountains have a way of swallowing people whole, physically, mentally, spiritually, and I learned that the hard way. My name is Eli. I'm 29, and until last October, I thought I knew the mountains I grew up around. I'd hiked every ridge near my hometown in southwestern Virginia, spent nights under stars so bright they hurt your eyes, and wandered through hollows no one else dared to enter. I'd always felt safe there, until I found the Hollow of Whispers. It started as a simple hike. I wanted to clear my head after a brutal week at work. I parked at an old trailhead I knew, a logging path that wound deep into the Jefferson National Forest. The morning was crisp, the sunlight piercing the canopy, and the forest smelled of wet pine and earth. I carried a small backpack, water, food, a flashlight, a notebook, and my camera. Nothing extraordinary. I followed the trail for hours. The woods were quiet, but not in a threatening way, more like the calm that comes before a storm. By midday, I noticed a narrow side trail that I'd never seen before, overgrown with ferns and vines. Something about it drew me in. It felt old, almost as if it had been waiting. The deeper I went, the stranger it became. The trees thickened unnaturally. Shadows twisted and shifted in ways that didn't match the sun. The air grew heavy, like walking through water. And then I heard it, a faint whispering, barely audible, coming from every direction at once. Eli. I froze. My pulse spiked. I called out, but no answer came. The whisper repeated, soft, patient, insistent. My skin crawled. I realized I wasn't alone. Hours passed, though I couldn't tell if it was hours or minutes. Every direction I tried led me back to the same clearing, a hollow surrounded by ancient oaks. At the center was a massive tree, wider than any I'd ever seen. Its bark was gnarled and dark, twisted into shapes that almost looked like faces, faces screaming silently. Roots snaked across the clearing, forming a crude barrier. And then I saw them, figures emerging from the tree line, not human, but resembling the tall, emaciated men in old Appalachian legends. Their limbs bent wrong, their movements smooth, inhuman. Their faces were featureless, smooth as stone. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. One of them lifted a hand, or what passed for a hand, and I felt it in my mind, a pull like gravity but sharper, twisting me toward the tree. And the whispers grew louder, chanting a single word over and over, stay. I fell backward, scrambling over roots. I remembered stories my grandmother told me when I was a kid about the forest keepers, spirits that trapped wanderers who disrespected the mountains. She had said you could distract them by offering a part of yourself, a token, a name, a memory. Desperation made me act. I tore pages from my notebook, wrote my full name, my birthday, every memory I could remember, and tossed them into the hollow at the base of the tree. I shouted, "Take it! Just leave me alone!" The figures paused. The whispers ceased. For a heartbeat, I thought I had escaped. Then I ran. I ran blindly through the brush, over roots, leaping ravines, until I broke through the tree-line onto a logging road. The sun was setting. The forest looked ordinary. Birds called, wind rustled the leaves. I collapsed, shaking, convinced I had survived. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I packed at first light and drove back to the city, leaving the mountains behind. Weeks passed. I told myself it had been hallucination, exhaustion, stress. But deep down, I knew it hadn't been. A month later, I received a strange package in my apartment. Inside was one of the pages I had thrown into the hollow, now darkened and brittle. On it was a single word I had not written: soon. Then came the dreams. Every night, I was back in that hollow. The tree loomed, the roots curling toward me. The figures glided silently through the fog. The whispers returned, faint at first, then growing, repeating the same word: soon. I woke each morning sweating, my heart pounding, my hands covered in dirt that wasn't there before. I thought it was the end. I thought I had survived. But yesterday, I woke to find a small stone on my windowsill. Smooth, black, etched with spirals like the ones at the base of the tree. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. And yet, I can feel it pulsing alive. Something in the mountains is calling me. I know now I never truly left. A piece of me stayed behind, tethered to the hollow of whispers. And I know, one day, the mountains will reclaim what is theirs. The Appalachian Mountains do not forgive. They do not forget. They wait. And I am running out of time. I should have never driven out that night, but I couldn't resist. I've been chasing abandoned places for years. Old hospitals, factories, schools. But something about the Ralston paper mill called to me like nothing else. Closed since the early 70s, the town whispered about it. Accidents, disappearances, fires that never made sense. People claimed the building had a weight to it, like it remembered everything that happened inside. The road leading to the mill was narrow, lined with trees whose bare branches clawed at the sky. Fog rolled off the river and pressed against my windshield, reducing visibility to a few feet. By the time I arrived, the sun was gone, leaving only a gray sky and the silhouette of the mill against the dark horizon. I parked on a cracked asphalt lot and approached on foot. The main gate had long since fallen apart. Rusted chain links sagged in a heap, and the brick walls of the mill were streaked black with age. Broken windows reflected the moonlight, like countless empty eyes staring at me. My stomach tightened. I shouldn't go inside. Of course, I went inside. The front doors had been pried open decades ago. I slipped in, flashlight in hand. The air was cold and sharp, smelling of rust, mold, and something I couldn't place, something almost organic. Dust floated in the beams of light. The factory floor was vast, silent except for the creak of floorboards under my feet. Rusted machinery, conveyor belts frozen mid-motion, and broken looms loomed around me like frozen giants. I started documenting, snapping photos, taking notes. Everything was as expected until I reached the office area. Filing cabinets were overturned, papers strewn across the floor. Most of the logs were mundane, but one caught my eye. An employee's note scratched in a hurry. They are still here. Don't go into the basement. I paused. Of course, I went to the basement. The stairwell was narrow and dark. The smell grew stronger as I descended, a mixture of mold, rust, and something else. Rotting, but not quite human. Each step groaned beneath my weight. When I reached the bottom, I realized the basement was bigger than the building should allow. Corridors stretched endlessly, rooms branching off into places I didn't remember seeing on the blueprints I'd found online. I walked down one hallway and froze. Shadows move along the walls, too fast, too fluid to be cast by anything I could see. At first, I told myself it was my imagination. Then I heard whispers, soft, unintelligible, but unmistakably close. Go leave, stay. I spun, flashlight swinging. Nothing. My pulse raced. I moved cautiously forward. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chorus that pressed against my mind like water filling my skull. I found a room at the far end, doors hanging off their hinges. Inside were photographs scattered across the floor, workers, managers, visitors, all staring blankly at the camera. Some faces were scratched out, others blurred. I stepped closer and realized something that made my blood run cold. The last photo was of me, taken that night, standing at the edge of the doorway. My face was wrong, expressionless, hollow eyes. The air thickened, the shadows pulsed. Figures began to emerge. Tall, thin, featureless shapes that didn't walk but glided, circling me, patient and silent. I backed up, tripping over loose boards. The whispers became voices inside my head. Join us, stay, forever. Panic surged. I ran blindly through the maze of hallways. Doors that should have led to the main floor twisted, leading me back deeper into the basement. My flashlight flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed me. I felt them then, hands on my arms, cold and insistent. I screamed, but the sound was muffled, absorbed into the shadows. My body felt heavy, sluggish, as if I wasn't entirely in control. I tried to pull free, but the shapes pressed closer, wrapping around me, pulling at something I didn't understand. And then, unexpectedly, I was outside. The moon was high, the fog thick but not oppressive. The mill loomed behind me, silent and still. I ran without looking back until I reached my car and drove away. I thought I had escaped. The next day, I woke in my apartment. Everything seemed normal. I tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination, the product of obsession and exhaustion. But then I noticed small things, shadows that lingered too long, reflections that didn't quite match my movements, objects slightly moved when I wasn't looking. It took a week for me to understand. The mill hadn't let me go. It had followed me, not physically, but through perception, through space, through reality itself. Its presence pressed against the edges of my vision, intruding into my life. Then I noticed the photographs. They started appearing little by little, on my nightstand, my desk, and my wallet. Each one showed me somewhere I'd been recently, but with shadows pressing in closer, faces emerging where they shouldn't. The final image, left on my pillow one night, showed the mill itself, looming impossibly large, stretching its walls toward me, reaching. I realized then the truth. The mill doesn't exist as a building. It exists where I exist, and one day, it will take me completely. Weeks turned into months. The whispers became words I could understand. You belong to us. You belong here. And I knew I could fight, resist, ignore it, but why would I? The mill had shown me its secret. It thrives on fear, fascination, and attention. I am its witness, its conduit. I don't go outside much anymore. I write, I photograph, I document, but only for it. The mill is patient, and so am I. One day, it will claim me fully. And when it does, I will step willingly into its halls. Because some abandoned places are never abandoned. They wait, they watch, and the Ralston paper mill, it has been waiting for me all along.
If you enjoyed the chills, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.